Man, it's so good to be back with you guys. I know it's under different circumstances, but if I'm going to be someplace that I can be of help, I'd be here with y'all this morning. So I'm so glad to be with you guys this morning and just kind of walking with you guys. And I had the privilege of going up and seeing Becky and Joe a couple times this past week. You kind of flip back to pastor mode because that's all I've done most of my life, and so I had to go up and be a pastor to my friend, and going to continue to walk with him. So I was thinking, I kind of thought that I might be back here, and I was like, well, what do you say on a Sunday when everybody's minds are thinking about lots of things, right? They just are. Let's be honest. And that's okay. That's just where we are. And so I was thinking about what might be helpful this morning, and this ironically ties a little bit. If you were here last week, it kind of ties to it a little bit. And so if you didn't hear last week, go back online and listen to it, because I think it might be helpful, because they're kind of tied, and I didn't realize they were tied as I was kind of thinking through and praying through this week. But growing up, I often heard that the 23rd Psalm was read a lot at funerals, and just all the different nuances of that. And it's just like, okay, that's pretty cool. But after doing some studying and some understanding, it's really not about a funeral per se. It's about life. It's about life. And David wrote that psalm about his own life and about all the challenges of going through it, but that there was a holy God walking him through all of that consistently, all the way through. And so we have a video. I want you to see this video to kind of set the table for where we are today. I think it would be helpful. So look at this video for just a moment. I think it kind of talks about where we're going this morning.
Have you ever wandered in the valley? Those moments where you feel lost, wounded, broken. You look around and see an endless journey, surrounded on all sides, cut off from the surface above. The loneliness is palpable. The fear is real. But even here, God remains. For nothing can separate us from His love, neither height or depth. Here in this chasm, in the midst of the struggle, we can find peace. We can find security. We can find hope. For we are not alone. He will never leave us, and He will never forsake us. For He is God, the God of the valley.
So here's what I know about valleys. They never come when we want them to come at another time. Am I right? Like your valley, whatever it is like, well, that's a really bad time for that. Can it come next week or the week after or not at all? Your valley always comes at the time when you don't want it to be here. This is not a good time for this to happen, God. It's kind of busy. Now, we always have a reason why that valley should not show up in our lives, right? There's a reason why, that's a terrible time for that to happen. And I think that we have to step back and say the valley comes whether we like them or not. They do. I guarantee you, Joe did not go, oh, I want this valley. Please bring it on. That's not what we want, but this is where we are. And so I'm reminded that they never come at a good time. And let me help you out. There is no good time because there's always a time. This is just not going to happen. And so a couple things about the 23rd Psalm I want to set the table, because we're going to start there, but then we're going to go to another story similar to last week that talks about our valleys. The foundation of the 23rd Psalm is pretty simple. It's trust. Okay? If you've read it, if you've grown up in church, it's trust, and that the shepherd you're in His constant care all the time. Not just sometimes, but all the time. It's so important for us to see that. And I love this. The first half of the 23rd Psalm is how he leads, verses 1 through 3. The second part, 4 through 6, is that he is with you as you go. So he leads and he's with you as you go. So it's kind of an important deal here. Because not only is he leading, but he's also with you. So if he's taking you somewhere, he's not pointing, he's going with you through it. And so I want to read the verse, and again, you've probably heard these verses lots of times. It says, David wrote these words. It says, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. He leads me in the path of righteousness for his name's sake. And this is the verse where we're going to camp for today. Verse 4 says this, even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are, what does it say? He's walk with you. He's with you, okay? Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table for me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup overflows. Surely goodness and mercy will follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. I'll be a magic number here at the end of this month. I'll be 60. Yeah, it's like, man, it gets here fast. How many of you go, yeah, no, you telling me something I already know? But something I'm reminded about is that my God that I have known for most of my life has been with me. As I looked back this morning, as I was driving over here this morning, I was just praying. My God has been with me in every valley that I have experienced. Every valley. Not just some, like he wasn't absent in some. He was part in every valley. It's just that sometimes the valley, you're starting to look around, right? Like we talked about last week when Peter was looking at the storm. And the valleys was like looking, the valleys, the valley, you're just seeing everything about the valley. But you forget the presence of God in the valley. Well, many of you know that Beth and I, we weren't able to have kids at all. And it was just the way it was. And we accepted that kind of in our journey together. And then several years back, God had a sense of humor and said, hey, you're gonna adopt a child when you're really old. I'm like, yeah, great, God, thanks. That was its own valley for just a moment. But one thing you don't know is that in the process of adopting, it's hard. It has, how many of you have ever adopted? Okay, some of you. So you know, it's hard work. You're trying to do a great thing in a very complicated process. It ain't easy. And so we were doing this thing called foster to adopt. We would have kids in to see if there was potentially that we could potentially adopt them. And so we had a young boy that we brought in, and Beth shared this story at the women's conference this past weekend. We had a young boy that came in, and they told us, they said, look, this kid has had catastrophic issues in his life. He has severe outbursts and all these things. And so, but we brought him in anyway, and we didn't experience those things early on. We never did. And it was funny because Beth and I, we said yes to God, and we brought that boy into our lives, and we were like, God, is this the path you're taking us down for this little boy? And we were starting to move towards maybe that this was the journey for us, that we would adopt this little boy. And so we started that process, and then at the time, Joe and I were still sharing the role of directing Super Summer, and I'll never forget, I had this strong sense that the court was not going to approve us to be his parents. And there was one person in particular that hijacked that, but that's another story for another day. And so the court, I'll never forget, it was a Friday morning. I was in my last week of directing camp at Super Summer, and I get the call that they're not going to let this little boy be adopted by us. And you know that puts you in a pretty dark valley, because God said you're going to have a child in your home, and we're like we're being obedient, and then here we are at the precipice of adopting, and then it went this way. And I got to tell you, folks, that was hard. That was really hard. The valley was dark. And here's the weird thing. In the valley, that valley, no one knows what to say to you. No one knows what to say to you. And let me help you out. For Becky and for Joe's sake, they don't need to have some great eloquent words. The most powerful thing you'll do, was already been said, is pray for them. Okay? Pray for them. And so no one knew what to say to us, but I'm reminded of a story because when God told Abraham that he would have a child, and he had a child, and he said, and I need you to sacrifice your child. Wait, what? Here's the thing about that. It put Abraham in a valley where he had to remember that God said that through his seed, the Israelites would be like sand. So he had to remember the promise, but he also had to be obedient. And so he did. Because that means he had to trust that God's still going to make this happen through his son. And so I had to remember that when we were told no, I had to remember that God said that we would have a child in our home and we would adopt. And so Beth and I, we just hit pause for about 30 days, kind of licked our wounds and kind of just tried to regroup and like, okay, God. We still knew that we were going to adopt, but it hurt and it stung, and our valley was dark for that 30 days-ish. And then in September, we kind of just, God was like, okay, come on, get out of the nest, let's go. And we got out of the nest, and he's like, you need to get back in the game. And we got back in the game, and we had a little girl that our caseworker said, hey, you ought to meet this little girl named Italia, and said, hey, why don't you have her come and do what they call a respite, which is a weekend kind of rest for the people who give her full-time care. So we said, yeah, okay, well, let's give this a go. And that began the journey of where we would adopt Italia Marie Payne. And this is a picture of her. I want you to see that. This is my girl. She's 5th grade. Now, right now, on her other arm, she has a cast. So that happened Friday night while she was rollerblading. But that is her. She'll be 11 in November. And God, the valley took us to the mountaintop. So just remember that. Every valley has a mountaintop. Okay? Every valley. It has a mountaintop. It's just that when we're stuck in the valley, we can't see as well. We don't see everything that's really going on. And God led us to that sweet little thing. And so I can't, that's just the blessing of that. So that's what I wanted you to share. So let me ask you a question. How many of you are in a valley or facing a valley right now? It could be anything. It could be health. It could be marriage. It could be spiritual life. It could be anything. Get your hands back up high, nice and high. Okay, thank you. Here's what I'm going to ask you to do at the end of the service. So I'm preparing you now. And you go, we don't ever do that kind of stuff here. Well, I'm going to ask you to do it today. Here's what I want to ask you to consider doing. If you lifted up your hand at the end of the service, we want to pray for you. Okay? And here's what I'm asking you to do. All I want you to do is raise up your hand, and I'm going to ask people that are around you to come around you. You don't have to say a word. Just hold up your hand. And they will pray for you about your valley because God is the one that knows about your valley. Right? So we're going to do that at the end of the service. Okay? So a few things about your valley. God can lead you through still waters, but sometimes you got to go through a valley. Okay? And those still waters and the greener pastures sometimes require us to go through those hard things. A couple things about valleys that maybe you didn't know. Some of those valleys are self-induced. They're our fault. We put ourselves in those valleys. Some of those valleys, God sends us to the valley. Think about Jesus. Jesus has just done, he's been inaugurated into his public ministry. He's been baptized. He comes out. Everybody's celebrating. And where does he go? 40 days of wilderness. Woohoo! That sounds fun. That's where his life. So God can send you into, that can happen. And if you read the Bible, there are lots of times where God sends us through the valley because that's where we grow best. The tough ones are a little bit like Becky's thing. The who know why valley. Like why? Why is this cancer? Why was this car accident? Why was this? Why? We don't know those. But I also know that I can trust God to be in us while we walk through them, okay? A couple of other things I've noticed about valleys is they can cause amnesia about whose you are. They can cause amnesia like, you start, because you see the valley and that's all you see and you're all distracted and you kind of forget whose you are. You're His, okay? Valleys can bring discouragement because we are kind of impatient. We like things to get over. Like, I need this sickness running around in my family. I need it to be over. I need this treatment. I need whatever. And we're kind of impatient about those things. Something that's really important for you and I in the valley is that God can handle your questions. He can handle your questions. He can handle, if your valley, you're like, God, why? Talk to Him. Don't ignore it. He knows what you're thinking. So He can handle your questions. You may not like all the answers, but He can handle your questions. And here's probably the final thing as we kind of set the table for a few minutes this morning. The valley, I hate to say this, but this is true. The valley is crucial for our faith. It's crucial for our faith. We don't like the valleys. And here's why. Because typically the valley is where God does some refining. Where God does some refining. I don't know about you, but when you're in the valley, you pray a lot more, don't you? You pray a lot more. You are more in tune with God. You're going to God more frequently, and it's so important. Zechariah 13:9 says this. This is God's words. I will refine them like silver and test them with gold. They will call on my name, and I will answer them. I will say, they are my people, and they will say, the Lord is our God. See, the Father is in the business of refining us so that we look more like Him. And if you think about a refining process, it's the goal of the refining is to strip away the impurities so that it's pure, like in silver and gold, okay? That's part of what they do when they talk about refining, okay? And I like this too. Larry Osborne said this. He's a pastor. He said this. He said, tough trials and help me Jesus experiences aren't always a lot of fun. No kidding. But without them, there's not much need for God to show up. Think about it. If there's not a valley for God to show up, then do we pray as much? We don't. We're not as likely to pray. When everything is good, think about your prayer meter starts to dip a little bit. Just natural. But man, when we're thinking about Becky and Joe and the kids, man, I've been praying a lot for them, as many of you have. And that's kind of why sometimes we need those valleys to, because we need to fall back on the dependency of God. And so if you've got your Bibles, go to Mark chapter 4 for just a few minutes. Mark chapter 4. And this is a short little story, but it is another story that goes back to water. Starting in verse 35. Of the Gospels, obviously, a lot of people I kind of like Mark quite a bit because it's kind of rapid fire. It moves pretty fast, and Jesus, boom, 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 it just goes. I like it. And so, Jesus has got his disciples, and can you imagine the disciples? Another boat story, here we go. I mean, because, the one where, like last week, step out of the boat, it's time to get out of the boat. You're going to stay in the boat, you're going to get out of the boat. And if you get out of the boat, are you going to look around? And so the disciples were in a boat with Jesus again. Let me just tell you, if Jesus asks you to get in a boat, you're like, uh-oh, something's coming. I'm just saying. And so verse 35, it says this. It says, on that day, when evening had come, he said to them, let us go across to the other side. And leaving the crowd, they took him with them in the boat and said, let's get him in the boat this time. We don't want him walking on that water stuff again, okay? And other boats were with them as well. Verse 37, And a great windstorm arose, and the waves were breaking into the boat so that the boat was already filling. Tragic but funny story for me. I owned a boat briefly, and I'm not a captain of any shape or form. Best parents owned a lake house over in Council Grove for a number of years. And we thought, with having a daughter, we'll get a little boat so we can pull her around. It'll be fun. It'll be fun. And so the cool thing is that where Best Parents Lake House was directly across from where you put your boat in and take your boat out, which was pretty easy. So you just had to, and so I had standard protocols to put the boat in. And let me just tell you, if you want to test your marriage, have your wife back the boat into the water. If you've ever tried to back a boat in, some of you, like me, it's easy peasy, but oh man. She's like, you just do it. Okay. So I put the boat in, and I'm thinking through all the moving parts. Like, do I have my keys? Make sure it's got gas. All the life jackets are ready. Blah, blah, blah. Let me help you out. There's one important thing that you should do on a boat that's more important than anything else, is put the plug in. I failed to do that. So I pull the boat over from the little spot, and everything's good. I pull the boat over, I park it in this little stall, and we're getting ready to. I go up and start inflating things, and I notice that my boat is like this. And I'm thinking, well, there must be somebody in the boat. No, there was. It was just called water, and a lot of it. My boat was sinking rapidly. So I'm in a full panic mode, and I am trying to put a little tiny copper nut in a 1/2-inch hole under the water that I cannot see. And so I'm thinking about their boat was filling up, my boat was filling up, and of course then the rest of the story, the boat was, and I had to take it in, and that was another story. But their boat was filling with water, all right? Their valley is coming fast and furious for the disciples. It is coming here. Just think about this for just a second. The boat is filling with water. Verse 38, look at what happens. But he, talking about Jesus, was in the stern, asleep on a cushion. Are you kidding me? I got to tell you, Jesus could sleep well. I mean, if there's water coming in, and you're sound asleep, how many of you have somebody's everything could blow up and you'd still be asleep? Do you have those people? I mean, they can sleep through anything. So Jesus is sound asleep. You'd have to wonder if he had one eye open. Like, I'm just going to mess with him. I don't think he was, but it says, but he was asleep on a cushion. And they woke him and said to him, Teacher, don't you care that we are perishing? Have you had that moment? God, don't you care that I'm in this valley? Don't you care that we're going through this? Wake up and do something. I'm tired. They're in a panic. He's like, how can you be sleeping now? You're sleeping on the job. I love this because what the disciples are really saying to Jesus in this moment is this: Jesus, if you love me, why are you letting this happen? Why are you letting this happen? If you really love me, why are you letting this happen? I've been faithful. I go to church every week. I'm with you all the way through. I said yes. These things, the valleys still come. And this is an important message for us this morning. This is really important. Storms, valleys, they come to people that Jesus loves. Okay? They do. They come to the faithful. All you got to do is read the Bible. They come to the faithful. Just because you come to church, you give a tithe, you're faithful, you're basically moral, doesn't mean that a valley's not going to come. The valleys come. I love it because don't you care? God cares a lot about our valleys. A lot. And actually, if you just kind of read through the Psalms, is a great place to just kind of see his care. But if you read the Bible in context, it shows a continuous pattern of God reaching in our valleys. And something that's important in your valley is this. It's not the strength of our faith that matters, it's the object. The object is always Jesus. It's always Jesus. He's your strength in your valley. It's leaning in on him and not on your own stuff. And so Jesus, wake up, wake up, wake up, wake up. Can you imagine? He's like, guys, what are you doing? What are you doing? Verse 39. And he woke, and look at what he does. He woke and rebuked the wind and said to the sea, peace, be still. Now, think about this for just a second. It's crazy storm, and he says, peace, be still. And it says, the scripture says, it says it right here, it says, it would be still, and it came like glass. It was completely calm. You ever been on lake when it's like glass, not a breath of wind? You can see for miles. It's just flat and clear. It's like glass. And I was thinking about this when I was driving over. Do you think he was also saying that to his disciples? Be still. Slow down. Take a breath. My daughter, when I took her in for her arm, we were at a school event watching the outdoor movie, and she and her friend were rollerblading, and she, you can rollerblade and you catch rock or whatever, and she did, and she took a tumble, and then she broke her arm. She was in pretty good pain. And so we're driving over to the ER that night, and we had a thing with my girl when she was younger because she would get these panic attacks when she was younger, and we would always literally sit with her, and we would say, in through the mouth, out through the nose. Or reverse that. In through the nose, in, out through the mouth. And yeah. and so we were teaching her, and I remember I had to go back to that, and we're driving to the ER, and she kept asking me, like, how far is it? How far is it? How far is it? I'm like, just. And she started to calm down. And I think that's what Jesus is trying to do with his disciples and with us when our valleys is, slow down, just take a breath, just relax. Be still. And I think that be still so speaks to not only the wind and the waves, but to us in our valleys. Be still. Because that goes back to that Psalm 43. Be still and know that I'm God. Be still. And the wind ceased, and there was a great calm immediately. It didn't just kind of it was like, let's like turning off a light. That would just be amazing. It was like calm like glass. In verse 40, he said this. He said to them, why are you so afraid? Have you still no faith? What were you afraid of? My time has not come. This storm's not got anything over me. I have control over this too. Can you imagine? He's like, the waves and the wind, remember, they obey me. I created them. Why are you afraid? Why are you afraid in your valley? I'm with you. I'm your anchor. I'm your support. I'm the one that carries you through the valley. Their valley rose up suddenly. Some of your valleys will rise up suddenly. Joe's and Becky's rose up suddenly a week ago today. And then it changes all kinds of things for us. But it doesn't change what God is doing. He's still in the valley. And it says, and they were filled with great fear and said to one another, who is this that the wind and the sea obey him? Yeah. Have you forgotten that he fed some people too and raised some people from the dead and healed some people? He did all those things too. So let me give you a few takeaways for us in our valleys. And this may help you, because if you don't know who this God is, maybe I'm going to give you a little better picture of him this morning. And a couple things that I've noticed about my God is this. He never panics in my valley or yours. He never panics. He never goes, oh, what do we do? He never says, I never saw this coming. He never says that. He says, okay, let's go. He never panics in your valley. This is really important for us. He is always present in our valley. Okay? Here's the thing. I was driving over this morning and I was thinking about this. Do you know how amazing this God is? That He is present with us this morning, and He's over at KU Med in room 5114 with Joe and Becky and the kids. And He's also at Story Hill Church over here and Free City over there. I mean, you know what I mean? We have a God who's able to be present in all places, and not just kind of like thinned out version, full on. Full on. That the same God is giving the same authority and personal attention here this morning that He is at KU Med and anywhere else. I don't know about you, but that's the kind of God I need. You know what I'm saying? That's the kind of God I need. That's the kind of God He is. So He doesn't panic. He is always present in our valleys. And I like this one the most. He knows the way through the valley. And I don't know what that is for everybody. But He knows the way through better than I do. And that's my part in this, is to lean in on Him and say, I don't know the way through this one, God, but You do. So I'm going to trust You with it. I'm going to lean in on Your path. I'm going to lean on You because You know the way through. And that, folks, let me just tell you, that's probably the hardest thing to do in the valley is, God, let me help You. God's like, actually, just get your hands off the wheel. Like, I got a true statement. I hate going to a drive-through car wash because I have to take my hands off the wheel. Some of you like nodding, yeah, because you're like, well, what if it gets off track? What if, like, you have to put it in neutral and you have to just let it go. And it's like, I shouldn't need that much control in my life. It's God's thing. He knows the way through our valley. He knew what to say to the disciples. He knew that the storm was going to come up. He wasn't surprised. That's why He was sleeping. That's why He was sleeping. He knew the storm was coming. Now, here's the cool thing. Go back to the story. It says there were other boats. Have you thought about this? There were other boats there. He calmed the storm for them too, even though they didn't ask for it. He just calmed the storm for the disciples, but the recipients of all the other boats that were there too, like, well, that's a pretty good prayer, folks. Thank you for asking Him, because we were sinking too. He knows the way through the valley. He is never caught off guard. And even though we don't understand or question stuff, you just have to hold on to His hand and keep walking with Him. I told my church family a long time ago when I was pastoring that God paints on a canvas, but you only see about this much of it. And the canvas is really big that He paints on. So we don't understand or can't see or can't process, and we want to see and know and process, but He's God, I'm not. I'm going to trust Him. I'm going to hold on to His hand, and we're going to keep going. And that is how I get through the valleys, is holding on to His hand so that we get through that valley together. We read this passage earlier in Psalms 121, 1 and 2. It says, I will lift my eyes to the hills, for where does my help come? My help comes from the Lord, who made the heaven and earth. See, to know who will walk you through the valley is really important. God puts great people around you, but ultimately it is Him that leads you through the valley. It's just the question is, are we going to hold on to that hand? There was a guy, his name is W. Philip Keller. He wrote a great book on the 23rd Psalm. It's probably the best book I've ever read just about that. And he said this. He said, as Christians, we will sooner or later discover that it is in the valleys of our lives that we will find refreshment from God Himself. It is not until we have walked with Him through some very deep troubles that we discover He can lead us to find our refreshment in Him right there in the midst of our difficulty. The valleys are no fun, by and large. I can't think of a valley that went, boy, that was fun. They're just typically not. But I have discovered is that He has consistently been with me in the valley. Consistently. And I pray for you that you will remember that He doesn't panic, that He's always present, and He knows way through in your own valleys. Because if you don't have a valley right now, you will. It's just life. And so that's important for you to trust that. And I will say this to you, it's also important for you as a church. Don't panic. Don't panic. God is present here. Amen? And He knows the way through. So let's lean in on that. If we do those three things, we'll know we'll be able to lean in on God and know what's next. Okay? So let me go back to my question I said. Are you facing a valley right now?